I ended up having to tell them I was going to go this entrepreneurial route, which is not in my family background. That was a bit of me stepping out into the wilderness and saying, hey, I'm going to try something different.
What if I told you when we started this law firm, we thought that we would be the premier law firm in the country for what we did. We would work with all the sophisticated, all the high tech. 2 years in, we were working for someone I think that was 20, 21, 22, and living in a nursing home.
Generations back together and weaving that back into the fabric of our societies is a way of the future, and it'll solve a lot of problems that I think society has today.
We've tied ourselves to an identity of some sort. I work at X company, I'm a parent to this, or I'm just this way. How do you, as an individual, detangle that?
Seema, what if I told you, we have a law firm, right? What if I told you when we started this law firm, we thought that we would be the premier law firm in the country for what we did. We would work with all the sophisticated, all the high tech, all the big companies. But 2 years in, we were working for someone I think that was 20, 21, 22, and living in a nursing home. What would you think? Do you think we went wrong with our law firm planning?
No, I wouldn't, but maybe a previous version of me would.
Fair enough. Well, I am so excited to have a guest today that I've known for over 10 years, who, in full disclosure, was a client of my firm, is no longer a client of my firm, and we'll go through all of that. This person here has always been inspiring. Even when I met him in his earlier 20s, he has been making waves since his 20s. In 2013, he was recognized as top 20 under 20 in all of Canada, right? And we were talking about the two other Canadians, Shauna Pandya and Aman Kastagan, that we had on the show. I'm starting to believe that everyone in Canada is a genius. What do you think, Seema?
The evidence speaks for itself. And then I know they're not South Asian, but Ryan Gosling and Ryan Reynolds are just amazing. I'm a really big fan of Canada.
So Sameer Dhar is with us today. He's done a lot of different things. He's a successful startup founder and had an exit. He's also working in another company now. But what I thought was the funniest thing is that he went up to royalty and asked them how they met their mother. Is that right, Sameer? Is that what you asked Prince William?
No, well, not quite. I was back in 2011, I think, when the newly anointed royal couple, had come to Canada, and as part of their tour, they wanted to look at young Canadians that were doing things towards charitable causes that they believed in. And so I was building a charitable organization at that time, of which one of our projects was called Suit Up, inspired by How I Met Your Mother. As a naive young 18 or 19-year-old, I asked Prince William if he had watched How I Met Your Mother. Slight distinction there, but yeah.
That's great. Well, we're so excited to have you on the Happy and Human podcast.
Wait. Had he watched the show?
No, he said he'd heard of it, but he hadn't had a chance to as of that time. So.
Gotcha. He was a little busy being royal. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Sorry.
But a polite answer nonetheless, a royal polite answer that you would expect from someone in England, right? So, Sameer, we're excited to have you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and take, the last 2 or 3 sentences and tell our audience something that they can't find when they look you up on Google.
First of all, really appreciate being with you two today. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for having me. Ever since I've graduated high school, I've been building things. Started with building a charitable organization to getting into the health tech space, which is how Dinesh and I know each other. You built my first company coming right out of undergrad. I had sold it by the time I was just before 24, so 23. And then started on this next journey, of which I've had a few different other interesting adventures along the way, but I've just started another company about a year and change ago, again in the health tech space. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm proudly Canadian, based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Was born and raised here. One interesting thing that I think is not as Googleable is that I really believe in a world of multi-generational living and coexistence in a way that I think is uncommon, but potentially appreciated, especially by South Asian communities, given our cultural backgrounds. Mm-hmm. But it was informed, as we'll talk about, partly by having lived at nursing homes for 12 months as part of one of my journeys, and living amongst elders. but it developed in me this big conviction that, multi-generational living and coexistence has, in the Western world in particular, kind of dissipated over the centuries, especially as industrialization happened and we became age segregated. And now, I think, and I try to practice this myself, that putting generations back together and weaving that back into the fabric of our societies is the way of the future, and it'll solve a lot of problems that I think society has today. That's my hot take.
I really love that, especially as a working mom like that. I didn't have the support of like grandparents nearby when my kids were a lot younger, but I see now people that do, and it's such a gift, not only to the children that the grandparents are taken care of. It keeps the grandparents young. It provides a sense of ease for the parents, and there's really like an intangible, priceless something that happens when you bring generations together. There's family stories, there's wisdom, there's healing that can happen if we can come together. So I love that this is part of your journey, and I'm really curious about what you were doing in a nursing home.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you just shared there, and the wisdom transfer, the knowledge transfer. I mean, just sharing kind of the energy both ways. I think that's been the magical part, and the fact that friendships can happen also across generations. It's not just a familial thing. 50% of my closest friends are over the age of 50, and I'm 32, and it's been that way for a decade or so.
Do you think you're an old soul?
I have been described as such. Yeah, I have been described as such, but I think young at heart, old in soul, old in spirit. Maybe that's the way that I like to characterize myself.
Yeah.
When I met Sameer, one of the things that really struck me is not necessarily that he was, as people think, like an old soul, where they gravitate to things that are not flashy or what you would, associate with youth, but more so that Sameer always gravitated to things of principle and value. And I think that's what people mean when they say, wise or wisdom or things like that, that you're not easily following whatever latest trend there is out there only to figure out it's not the right thing for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when and part of the time when I met Sameer was that he was 22 years old and decided to build this company. Can I say the name of the company, Sameer?
Yeah, absolutely.
This company called Censorshare, right?
Okay.
And I'll introduce it a little bit because we wanted Sameer to tell his perspective. And Censorshare was developing an adult diaper
Diaper sensor, incontinence management sensor.
An incontinence management sensor for people well advanced in their age, primarily, right? Not thinking about, social media, not thinking about connecting, not thinking about self-driving cars or anything like that. That's what he was thinking about, where he decided that innovation was needed. And part of the reason we got to know each other is because he was living in a nursing home in Baltimore. So Sameer, tell us a little bit about, where does that come from? Not many people in their youth are thinking about starting a company in an area that benefits a segment of the population they don't have very much connection to, right? We're thinking about, what is our need? What do I need right now? And then to arguably give up a lot of your early 20s to build this company, and then deciding that I need to go live in a nursing home to really understand how this device would work so that I could make it the right way. I can't say I know anyone else that has indicated to me they would think that way or do something like that.
It's interesting to reflect upon how that whole journey started. I think there's a couple of key threads that might be of interest. One is that when the impetus for starting that venture was kind of born out of a frustration of not being able to find my way in all the other traditional paths in life. And so the first thing, maybe from a story perspective, was coming out of high school, I started a charitable organization that did a bunch of work, raised millions towards poverty relief through galvanizing the school system in the province, Alberta, where I'm from. What that instilled in me was this understanding that making a difference in people's lives and social impact is part of what I want to spend my time doing while I'm here. But I had that juxtaposition between wanting to do good, but also wanting to do well in the sense of financially and being able to be self-sufficient. And of course, I know the South Asian stereotypes of become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, et cetera, from my family background, and my sister's is a doctor. So yeah, that much was there. So you were kind of in your late teens, early 20s, trying to think through, okay, what is this that I want to go do, and who is it that I want to become? And actually, I actually tested some of these things, right? So I went into the investment banking / high finance route, summered at Morgan Stanley. But I remember sitting in my desk working 100 hours a week or whatever it was back then, after having had this experience building a charitable organization, making a real difference in people's lives. And here you were making a bunch of money, but sitting behind a PowerPoint slide deck or building a Excel spreadsheet all day long. There's this huge disparity in terms of the experiences and the quality of your life in those two different settings. So wind over to me graduating from undergrad, having had a bunch of these different experiences, like both making an impact with volunteers and towards a social cause, and also being in kind of the business world and finance and different settings. What I found was I didn't fit in, right? I didn't fit in into any one of these core paths that I think you can emerge from a post-secondary environment in. So to me, Censorship was born out of this frustration to say, hey, I want to make an impact. I realized that if you are building an actual enterprise, something that is self-sufficient in terms of making money, that it's your destiny is in your own hands, unlike the not-for-profit space where you're potentially going hand in hand year after year asking people for money. And the funny thing about the censorship journey was I didn't even know what incontinence management meant at the age of 20, right? I didn't know what that problem set what even was. It wasn't that I had a grandmother or anything or grandfather that had that as an issue. So to me, it was literally just, hey, I want to solve a problem that's meaningful, that I find personal meaning in. Healthcare in general, if I can find a problem to solve in healthcare, it's probably going to make a difference in somebody's life. Elder care became part of the mix just because there's not a lot of innovation happening in the space, huge aging population. So might as well go out after that type of an industry and try to understand some of the problems in that space. And the journey really just started by talking to a ton of people in the space. So geriatricians, care home administrators, nursing staff, et cetera, and saying, where does your day suck? And they're the ones that then elucidated that issue of incontinence and incontinence management to me. It was born out of frustration, but curiosity at the end of that frustration to say, hey, is there a problem that I can solve that might be meaningful, and then letting the path emerge.
That is a really good synopsis. Helps me crystallize and understand where you're coming from. But I want to come back. I was 20, 19 at one time, and those types of thoughts were not in my universe. And they aren't in the universe of many people at that age. On one hand, I can choose to believe it's sort of just who you are. It's not repeatable. It's two cells coming together and making an amoeba, and boom, you got life, right? Or on the other hand, I want to ask, is there something that now you can look back that your parents, that you were exposed to as part of your environment that created sort of the soup for you to think this way, have the confidence, right? Because a lot of people are suffering from confidence issues at that time, to say that, hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to think, I know that I can do something of impactful, and go out and raise money, right? You were raising money from some very, very wealthy individuals, and go in front of them and pitch them on this idea that most people would run from, which in fact most people did run from, because that's why it was a problem.
I think the value of education and just achievement and trying to make something of yourself is something that a lot of South Asian families, especially immigrants coming to North American or Western societies, we all share. And so that, without a doubt, was a catalyst for both my sister and I to achieve and do things that were meaningful. My life in reflection thus far has been a series of, hey, these are external expectations or things that have been imposed as part of growing up or your environment, but also a rejection of certain concepts and a challenging of those concepts. It's a continuous process, really, right? Like you keep forming a clearer and clearer sense of who you are as you go through these different experiences. So like a good example of that is, number one, obviously not going the doctor, engineer, lawyer route, even the investment banker route, which is still a more established path that
Mhm.
my parents could understand, right? After I convinced them that it's not, being an investment banker wasn't being a teller. And I got them excited about that. I ended up having to kind of tell them I was going to go this entrepreneurial route, which is not in my family background. Nobody understands
Mhm.
what that kind of a route means. That was a bit of me stepping out into the wilderness and saying, hey, I'm going to try something different. Even when I started my charity, by the way, like throughout high school, being involved in student council, doing things that were kind of leadership oriented or service based. Um, that was always, I remember my parents always pushing back to say, hey, are you spending enough time on your studies? Right. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't part of their accounting mechanism of what you should be doing at that stage. I would say that, there's a lot of values and work ethic and a bunch of things that my parents and my family have ingrained in me along the way, but it's also been a pushing against, some of the norms, the status quo of what they would have expected and what they continue to expect, and going your own way has been the thread of my life so far.
I think it's so common to, or rather so normal to hear someone else's story and think about, well, where was I at that point? It's interesting. I remember being in my 20s and too fearful
Mhm.
to actually do anything outside of those boxes. Like the recognition, the analogy I always use when people ask me, how did you go from being a dentist to doing everything you do now? I tell them it's like when you walk by a store window and you see, for women, like a really beautiful dress that you think you really want, and so you work and you save and you buy it, and then you put it on and you realize like the color's not flattering, the material's really itchy, it's just not what I actually thought I wanted. But being too fearful to kind of recognize that that was the case, and you just sort of keep shoving yourself into this uniform, if you will. So I just think it's really incredible. And the question I often wonder is, what is it about a person that makes them have that self-awareness and be able to either meet that fear or go beyond that fear so that they can say, you know what, I don't agree with this. This does not feel good. And here's what I want to do instead.
Honestly, my reflection on that, from at least my experience, has been it's about a lot for me. It was about mentors and the people who did see it another way, who I could look up to and who would back you. Right now, back you could be with just their support, with their guidance. It could be with financially from an investor perspective. And I think having people in your life who maybe see you in a different light than the folks who helped you grow up, and who were your parents and your family. I think that makes a big difference because it allows you to take those risks and to maybe go a different way than what you would have otherwise, but with the comfort that there are people who actually believe in you and who are willing to be with you on that journey in some way as you
Mm.
take those risks. That has definitely been part of the equation for me, in every step that I've taken personally.
Yeah. So where did you find these early mentors that gave you, in essence, allowed you to give yourself permission to think about what you did want to do?
One kind of great example starting point was my former leadership teacher, George Height, back in high school. George and I were the ones who ended up starting that charity Geomir that we built together after I graduated from high school. He was one catalyst of me, spending time doing things like being on student council, spending time kind of really thinking about the type of impact that I want to make on the world. With his support and then eventual partnership, we were able to do some really cool things together. From an investor perspective, during censorship days, met those people along the way. Right, some of the charity work I had done got me into different circles, and got me different mentorship. And some of those people ended up actually backing me. University, trying to take on leadership positions, you meet people who end up you resonating with, and then they decide that they want to back you or be involved in your life in some way. No matter what journey you're on, I feel if your purpose is true, then you'll find the people, or they'll find you.
Absolutely. Sameer, as you were talking, I realized that you have a hidden talent that we're going to point out to you here, which
Oh,
I think
please.
is coming up with names of organizations. You took George and Sameer and you got Geomir. You took a smart sensing adult diaper and came up with Censorshire. I mean, if you left Seema and I to name this podcast with those principles, we'd come up with Simnesh or uh, Danima. We'd come up with the welcome to the Danima podcast, folks. But you do have a knack. I'm just
It's all
realizing that.
surface. It's all surface level, is what you're trying to say.
No, but you're doing this before ChatGPT was a thing. If I was naming a company now, I'd put it in a ChatGPT and give me 100 and then go from there.
That's
Um,
funny.
but I want to ask you. So you've done the exit, which a lot of people now sort of fantasize about. So having a startup, having an exit, and riding off into the sunset. Which I, without giving away too much, I knew you did a little bit of that. You did ride off into the sunset for a little bit before coming back. I want to ask you a multi-part question. One, from your early successes, both professional, personal, and financial, what is something that you would be comfortable or willing to share with our audience that has educated you from that came out of those successes that you said, okay, this is what I now know um, about finances or professional success or startups, things like that. Who was it? Tom Hanks or George Clooney or someone? I can't remember. Some famous Hollywood actor said that I wish everyone was rich and wealthy and famous so they know that it's not the thing to aspire to, right?
Mhm.
So that's the type of question I want to ask. And then what would you do differently? To the extent you can share, what would you do differently during those years where you were trying to build censorship?
The interesting thing for me post exit and even getting onto the next journey and stuff has been that it as you get old, as you go through these experiences and get older, it actually becomes really challenging to preserve a blissful ignorance or a beginner's mindset, if you will. Like the more you learn, and the more people you know, or more resources you have, or whatever the thing is, you shift from this having nothing to lose mindset where you just go out into the world and you figure stuff out,
Mhm.
personally, professionally, whatever it might be, and you shift to this kind of, oh my gosh, I actually have something to lose, or I know all these things. You start to look at life like a bunch of risks, right? And both on, business, personal front, you look at life as a bunch of risks, and it's harder. It was much harder for me, for example, to get into my second business than it was the first. It was totally counterintuitive. At each stage of life, you can just enjoy the process more. And I say that to myself even now, building this
Yeah.
next venture. It's easy to say and much harder to actually internalize and practice.
Mm.
Yeah, because each phase or each journey you go through, it's magical, really, right? Like the to be able to be in that journey, to just like be one with whatever the cause is at hand that you're pursuing. And the things you know and don't know at that point in the journey, and the magic behind the fact that, oh, there's actually something beautiful about the fact that you don't know everything when you're at the start of one journey, and when you don't have anything and you don't have money or anything like that. You can take risks, and you just think about the world differently, and there's something to be appreciated about that, right?
Yeah.
If there was a way I could even now figure out how to better appreciate the here and now, and the phase of each journey, the journey and the present as you have it at each stage. If
Mhm.
there was a way in which I could continue to refine the craft of being present in each phase, I think that's the thing that I would tell my younger self, and honestly even myself today. So that's a huge challenge, to not constantly be thinking about the future risks, internalizing your knowledge and then trying to kind of gamify the system and constantly be thinking about things other than the present. I think that's been a big learning for me along the way.
That really hit home with my soul. For one, I was actually thinking about this very thing last night. I was winding down for the day and I thought, how do you know that you're being present enough? And it's such an overachiever question to ask. Like, even the question, I can't even say it without laughing at myself. But I am curious. It was really something that I pondered. Like, am I being present enough? And you can't quantify that. But I'm going to ask both of you what you think.
Dinesh, you should go first on that one.
Well, if I were to answer from my perspective, and I usually do the questioning here, Sameer, so I appreciate the sleight of hand here. I do have a slightly different perspective. I've started a business, and very quickly, even with the law firm, you think back to those early days, right? And you've heard people in businesses and companies say, back in the old days, we used to do things that way. So that time goes really quickly. I also have the perspective of having kids and seeing that go very quickly. I try not to sweat the presence question. Am I present enough? Should I have rules about not having a phone at the dinner table or being on a conference call? I try to just do what my kids need or makes sense for me to need at the time, right? And I'll give you an example, two examples from yesterday. My son came home, and I work in my home office. My desk is right over there. And he came down from school, right down, and he's like, "Hey, are you going to come up? Are you working late? Are you going to the gym? What are you doing?" I was in the middle of an email I need to get done. So he came over, gave him a hug. I showed him this big brief I was writing. He goes, "Why is it so long?" I try to take a picture because the client is a friend who lives around the corner, whose daughter actually babysits him. So I was like, "Let's send it to insert name." And he's like, "No, I'm going to go upstairs." Right. So that's one example where I tried to be present without thinking that I needed to stop work or shoo him away. It was just in that moment. And the other thing is, we're getting ready to go on a trip, and last couple of trips we've taken with other families. And we said to my kids, "Hey, should we invite anyone else?" And when I mean invite, we just put it out on a text thread. Whoever can make it, great. If you can't make it, don't worry about it, right? And his face kind of dropped. And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" He's like, "Who are we going with?" And I was like, "Well, no one yet. We haven't told anyone." He's like, "Oh, great. Well, I just want to go with you guys." Right. And rather than asking myself, am I present enough? That was the answer to me, that am I present enough? Because he has trust and faith that if he went with me alone, I would be there, and not that he would be bored or needed outside stimuli or another person or things like that. To wrap it up, different stages, different phases, different times in life, even with the same circumstances. I could be super busy one weekend night, right? He could be off at camp or something, but you kind of just have to look at it and see, does it feel right?
Well, I think what you just ended off there is by saying different stages, different phases of life, what being present, what feeling present is, it differs, right? At a high level right now, I'm in the first year of building a venture-backed startup, and there's a lot of, on a day-to-day basis, goals, being in the flow of things, because you're forced to, by the nature of your cause and by the nature of the task that you've set out to accomplish. And you're in a very particular phase where that forces you in many ways just to be present by nature of the demands of what you're being tasked to do. Whereas, there was a 3 or 4 year period between businesses, between my previous exit and starting Nia Health, where I liken it to the analogy of a farmer needing to let the fields lie fallow for a season when you're in transition. And there you were able to, put into practice a different form of, maybe being present, or get to a different form of being present, where, you were able to be much more mindful, reflective. You were able to be more spontaneous in many ways with how you lived your life, and your relationships also, by virtue of the time that you were able to spend, those took a different form and were able to feel differently. The insight from reflecting on this is that depending on the phase that you're in of life, and what the demands are of life at a given stage, what being present and what you need to do to be present, I think it shifts.
We need to reconcile what social media and a lot of lifestyle folks out there tell us, which is self-care and lifestyle and sort of ease should be the norm for the rest of your days. I have come to believe, from my experiences, both as a parent, as a business owner, as a lawyer, any type of transition of moving from one state to another can only be successful if it is accompanied with a massive amount of energy. And the way to think about that is you've got a rocket sitting on the surface of the Earth. To get that rocket to move initially, to break the gravity, the pull of gravity, you have to expend a lot of energy, a lot, almost borderline obsession, right? Which is
Yeah.
what Sameer did. He was living in nursing homes because, if I remember correctly, that you couldn't afford hotel rooms, right? And you were building this money because you're putting everything into the company. And so he said, well, I'm just going to drive to Baltimore in a van with 3 guys and live in the nursing home or live in a van. Same with kids. When you have kids in the very beginning, you're waking up in the middle of the night. It takes a lot of energy to bathe them, feed them, do everything. Around year 4, year 5, they start to go to the bathroom themselves. They start to do everything else, and you can back off. I think that's an important nuance that is missed in today's hustle culture and toxic masculinity on one side, and on the other side, like, don't hustle, don't be sort of a finance bro. But in the middle, a lot of people are starting new things and saying, well, it should just coast right into success. And 2 years later, they're burning out saying, well, I never got to success. And you'll see this in people trying to start businesses, podcasts, things like that.
You can be present and make a lot of effort. And you can be present and be at ease, right? And the trick is balancing effort and ease. You can make effort and find ease in that effort. I think that is where I get, a little bit caught up, because I certainly don't buy into this, like, you need to grind it out. There's a phase of that, you working with dedication, working with focus, working with a goal in mind. That means that, you're not going to ever have balance. Like, for example, right now, I'm writing a keynote speech. I'm in my office a lot. And my kids know where to find me. And I'm not going to sit there and judge myself as a parent, because they know it's phasing. It won't be like this when I'm done writing the speech, and it's just going to be different. And that, to me, it's working with effort, but still being present for that effort, still recognizing, oh, I haven't had water. I haven't said hello to the kids. Let me go outside and see what they're doing. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there is falsity to, oh, just sit there and manifest. That's not true either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
I agree with that
thought. And I think it's interesting, the whole question, even just in terms of what we tell ourselves, right? Like, are we exerting enough, even in being present? It's like, what does that tell you about how people are raised and brought up? Is it's like you constantly have to achieve in order to qualify and validate, which is, I don't even know how you do that. Present enough? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is also a question that's been thousands of years of human existence old. It's something that hasn't changed regardless of technology and stuff. Is how does one be present? All the spiritual, religious traditions, et cetera, try to speak to this in some way or another as well, right? It's an unanswered question. Maybe it's an unanswerable question in some ways, especially with the limited time we have together. But I mean, it's such an important one to consider every now and again, right?
Yeah, I think we just forget to ask, and then we wonder why we feel lost.
Yeah,
totally.
I actually think I would characterize it, Sameer, not as an unanswerable question, because there shouldn't. It's almost a question that doesn't have an answer, but it's answerable by asking the question, right? And it's something that needs repetition, just like life itself, right? You've got to continue to breathe. You've got to continue to live. You've got to continue to progress. And if you stop that, that's where some of the things we're talking about. And so maybe the answer is just something that it has to be a practice, something that, almost like in religion, you have to strengthen or work on your relationship with God or creator or whatever. So that's where I come out on that. So let's turn real quick. You've exited, you have some financial success. You said you took about 3 to 4 years to be a farmer, or was that an analogy? I can't remember what you did, but you took about 3 or 4 years, and you turned the engines off, right? You just enjoyed life. I remember, if I remember correctly, you were in Beijing, and then you were in Europe, Croatia maybe. You were all over the place. You were learning Mandarin. Tell us about that, and how important has that been in molding the lens that you look at the world through today as opposed to someone who hadn't done that or didn't get the opportunity, or if you didn't choose to do that, I should say?
It wasn't 3 to 4 years of just gallivanting around the world. I'd say maybe 6 to 12 months of that. Um, but and yeah, so you traveled the world, you did a bunch of that kind of stuff. But I think eventually you came down to realize, man, you really have to come up with a purpose when you wake up in the morning. Otherwise, what's it all for, really? And you get a lot of empathy for retirees, by the way, because if you've lived a life and you work for 40 years or 50 years and then suddenly it all gets cut off, you're
Yeah.
trying to it's a huge period of transition because you're trying to figure out how do you reestablish your identity, who are you without that job, et cetera. And there was a lot of that happened. I think I had resolved that I did want to build something again.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of like I alluded to earlier in our chat, it was so much harder. It was so much harder to get started on the next thing. I must have gone through 40, 50 different business ideas in that time period, in those intervening years. And you would do diligence on those ideas. You'd talk to potential customers. You de-risk. You realize, man, once you did that, there's all these challenges with every single idea, right? Like you here's all the reasons why this thing won't work. Whereas I never thought like that 10 years ago when I was starting the first company, Censorship, right? So that's when I said ignorance is bliss. Like you have to preserve some of that beginner's mindset and be able to take leaps of faith, even with more knowledge or wisdom or whatever you want to call it after having gone through an experience like Censorship. I got to a point where it was almost like writer's block in a sense. Like you try so many things and then you just felt like you were stuck. And I ended up going back to school, and that's where I did the Schwarzman Scholars Program in China for a year. And so, yeah, I still learn Mandarin every day. I have a tutor 5 days a week to keep that practice going.
Wow.
But yeah, like you tried to kind of, push on other elements of yourself. During the pandemic, I ended up losing 30 pounds, just got on a massive health kick and kind of, journaling practice, meditation, putting all these different routines and structures in place to kind of center and ground yourself and find out, who am I evolving to be? And then what is this right next journey for me? After come back from China, continue to persist and say, you know what, I haven't found the thing yet that I'm willing to go all in on again, but I didn't give up. That's one thing, maybe that reflection wise in that transition period, is you always remain true to, you want to do something that's meaningful to you, because you know how it is. It's a real effort to try to get something off the ground and to create something out of nothing.
Yeah.
So it better be worth it. But you ended up, through persistence and learning at each rep along the way. I ended up being in the position I am with Nia. The overwhelming feeling I have about that whole process and journey is that Nia now, I'm filled with a lot of gratitude, like so much more gratitude for having found a vision and an inspiration that I'm excited about and that I believe is worthy, win or lose, and that you've got a great team that's working towards that every day. Because I think that gratitude is even more special because I had those 4 years of being in the wilderness and struggling so hard to get to this place. I come at this journey with way more gratitude. And back to our thing about being present, because I know how hard it was even to just get onto this journey again. It's so much easier to be present and every day grateful for the opportunity to work on something that I'm really excited about and that I believe, again, is worthy.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I know I want to know more about Nia. I know our listeners want to know more about it. But before I ask you about that, you mentioned this concept of identity, and we've actually had a couple of guests come on and say it comes up, right? They've done something amazing, and then they sell the company, or the company fails, or they decide they don't want to practice medicine or dentistry or law anymore,
Yep.
and they go off and they do something else. But what I see is, for many of us, that's more the exception than the rule.
Yes.
And so many of us have done this, maybe not in a professional capacity. Maybe we've been able to put that role down, but we've tied ourselves to an identity of some sort, right? I work at X company, or I'm a parent to this, or I'm just this way. How do you as an individual detangle that? Because you talked about needing to find space beyond just what currently is happening. So how do you do that?
What maybe it's cliche in the current climate, but growth mindset, it's so important. It's like, I don't even know how to explain how important having a growth mindset is, but I think it's one thing that even from a business perspective we have to have, especially at this stage of the company. If people don't come in with a growth mindset, it's not going to work. But what the growth mindset allows you to do is, number one, you have the humility to understand that what you are, that what you know, or who you are, or what you are, like, these things are in flux, right? They're nothing is a rigid set principle that can't be evolved, that can't be learned from, that can't be, have weaknesses that you can potentially grow from. And this idea of identity, I think this is a particularly acute concept with entrepreneurs, especially in the tech startup world, because you put in 100%, you become one with your company. Your identity is tied to your company. At Sensasure, that was how I felt, right? Like, you're living at nursing homes. It's literally 200% all in. Like, that's everything about you is. And I think there's something really special about the human experience when you can take a step back and say, okay, well, that's not all that there is to Sameer, or that's not all there is to you. And, here's the rounded out set of things that embody what it means to be you, and that to be you and who you are is an evolving concept. It's a constant process. Michelle Obama says of becoming, right? You're constantly evolving into another stage of what it is you are and who you are. But it is so like, and I mean, having spent as much time as I have with retirees and elders, it's a massive challenge. And especially with this aging population, we have this wave of people, baby boomers, who are retired or whatever it might be. And that's like such a challenging liminal space to have to occupy. And some people don't do the transition well, right? Like, they'll, watch TV all day long, or really, get depressed, or whatever the situation might be, because it is such a challenging part of the human experience that we don't get taught in school. Nobody tells you how do you do those transitions,
Right.
Correct.
how do you do those transitions well.
Yeah. We don't get taught that, and we take mindset as sort of a little bit of fluff, right? You don't hear a lot of people say that they need to work on their mindset. We have the assumption that our mindset is as good as it's ever going to be, and it's perfect the way it is and doesn't require work. But I wanted to touch on one thing you said about, you had this dichotomy between being at Censorship 200% in, and then taking a step back, right? I think that both of those are needed ultimately, because it's almost like that phrase, better to have loved and lost than never to have been in love at all. If you have not been so consumed and subsumed by something that's important to you, we'll call it purpose, a cause, whatever, a company that is so near and dear to you that you have almost lost your identity in it, you don't have the experience or the privilege or the opportunity to pull an identity back out for yourself. And what I've observed is that you end up maybe not developing the guardrails around an identity per se, and now are at the whims of influences around you, right? I think there needs to come a period of total obsession that allows you to draw a box around an identity, and then you take a step back out of that and say, okay, what of this do I want to keep and take? And if you never do that, you run the risk of potentially, like I said, just being at the whims of whatever influences you at that time. And you're like, well, I'm this, I see myself in this, I see myself in that. 2 decades of that, you look back and you're like, well, who am I? What do I care about? Where am I going? Right. Just my observation from also, at the time when you and I met, my identity was the law firm, right? And then the other day we had someone from the podcast who wanted to become a client of the firm, and I sent her on a conflict check, right? We would send a conflict check, And I put at the bottom, PS, if you want to hear about this person, here's a link to the Happy and Human podcast, right? I would have never done that before.
Yeah.
I would have sort of said, these are two separate identities. We can't let them interact. And then I would be in this integrity gap of, well, who am I? Like, I'm this person for you and another person for another person. And then you're just showing up in a reactionary mode for a long time.
That really rings true. A lot of people, maybe most people in the world, will react. They're just reacting to constant external stimuli without really interrogating what is their internal compass say, and what are the first principles of who they are, but starting with who they are. And of course, what other people think of you or what other stimuli you come across help to forge your own understanding of who you are and what you value, and et cetera. But I think that trying to have that almost playful, experimentative sense as you go through life of like, hey, this just happened objectively. How did I subjectively feel, or what does that say about how I see myself, or who I believe myself to be?
Yeah.
I think it's a really important journey to try and take. And I think back to some of the people you must have had on your podcast over the years here. If you're high achieving and you're in, the flow of being a lawyer, or, being a doctor, or being whatever the profession, et cetera, might be, that's demanding and that requires, most of your energy to just be focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to me sometimes when I see someone who's 50 or 60 and they've never had the opportunity or never taken it upon themselves to do the inner work, and actually don't really have a great sense of who they are. Because they just haven't gone on that journey. Right?
Yeah. I mean, even forget roles, but even little things like, am I somebody with hair or somebody without hair? Am I somebody with gray hair? Am I somebody who has to go? Like, I'm 42, guys, and I went from not having to dye my hair at all to like now I'm calling my girl every 6 or 8 weeks, like, and just really it's a mind bend of like, what does that mean? That change, and
Yeah.
it's completely optional. I don't have to go get my hair dyed, but my point to the listeners is that it's very, very sneaky at times. It's very quiet at times. These points at which we can question, we have the opportunity to question who we are and what we want to make those things mean for us.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunities are there. You don't have to change roles or switch careers or lose 100 pounds to have those opportunities. So, but I did want to get into Tania. Tell us what it's about and all the things.
Yeah. So, Nia Health, from a narrative perspective, is an extension of my desire after having lived at nursing homes for 12 months. And I lived at three homes across North America, including, by the way, one with a murderous nurse, literally got convicted of killing 8 nursing home residents. It's in the news and whatnot. This was about 10 years ago in Canada. And my desire is, how do we keep people out of nursing homes in the first place and healthy as long as possible? And so Nia to me is an expression of that desire. And in essence, what we're building is a virtual first proactive health partner. So we're basically trying to deliver top tier preventative or proactive medicine to the masses. So you don't want, top tier medicine and proactive health to be something that just the rich can afford. But how do we really drive that towards the masses? In terms of what it actually entails right now, we've built a next gen health checkup assessment based on advanced blood work, VO2 max testing, DEXA scans, gut microbiome testing, a whole bunch of other testing modalities, and we pair delivering those diagnostics with your medical history and saying, hey, here's your biggest risks to health and longevity. Here's the most actionable set of things you can do today to get in front of that risk. That could be both lifestyle as well as potentially follow up to the primary care system or pharmacotherapy or other things like that. We pair that also with clinician consults. So if people want to go deeper on understanding what their health risks, et cetera, are, but we're trying to drive this to the masses. In some ways, you might be familiar with executive health checkups that partners at law firms or other corporate America and corporate Canada that they get access to, $5,000-$10,000 assessments. we've brought some of our assessments at the lowest price point down to $250 a
Amazing.
person.
Wow.
So we're really trying to bring costs down 10x, but not compromise the value that we're able to create. We've been at it for just over a year and change. We raised pre-seed funding, and now and at this stage we're trying to get this thing to scale now that we believe we have the right product or initial product offering.
How do you know, because you're doing pre-screening and testing and adjustments now, how do you measure the efficacy if the goal is further out in life of prolonging health span, not lifespan?
I love that distinction, because to me, I don't really care, at least at this stage of life, about do I live or do I help other people live to be 120.
Yeah.
It's more about how do we make sure you have 90 good years
Yeah.
or 100 good years, where the last 10 are crippled by chronic conditions and things that really impact your quality of life and those around you.
Last 10 days, you mean, right? Not 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Like you
10
want
years
to
is a long
live,
time.
live and die. That's
Yeah.
it. There's no like dying. There's live and
Yeah.
die. It's a light switch.
Yeah, well, I guess that would be one form of an ideal. In terms of how we measure efficacy, what's really cool about the medical world today and science today is that there's a number of markers that we can look at, and that many public systems do look at, but perhaps don't interpret them and share out kind of findings in as efficacious a way that drives behavior change on a consumer level. But you can look at markers and understand what your cardiovascular disease risk, what your diabetes risk of you developing diabetes is at any given point. And if we're able to then give people a baseline, right, set of markers to track towards as they age and as they make behavioral adjustments, or maybe things that are more serious than that, as they do these throughout life, then you can see how their markers respond and what their actual risk profiles develop to be. I think that's actually lies at the heart of what it is we're doing. We're empowering consumers with their own data so that they can own their health and own their health outcomes along the way in a way which was just not possible or not facilitated by health systems to date.
Well, you're removing the paywall, basically.
Yeah.
Right. These things are out there, and people with large amounts of resources have access to it.
Yeah.
Even with, when I was growing up, I won't mention any names. When I was growing up, there was a very famous athlete that was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and that person's still alive today. They weren't supposed to be alive. And the difference, I think, is resources, right? So I think that's a really, really worthwhile mission, except you got to bring it to the US, bud.
Well, there's a lot of competitors in the US, not as many in a Canadian context. And actually, huge sums of money are being raised right now. I don't know if you're familiar with Function Health, being one of them by Mark Hyman. And so I think this movement is truly global at this point. Everyone, it's something that's universal, is wanting to live a long and healthy life. And it's, I think public systems globally are also being hit with, being under-resourced, the burden of disease becoming bigger and bigger across the board. And so how does one bend the curve to prevent disease before it occurs? I think it starts with empowering consumers globally with this type of information, and then partnership. And it's not just about giving people a report to say, hey, here's where all your risks are, and go do some more zone 2 exercise. It's how do I partner with you so you feel that you actually have a partner along the way. Whereas right now in many public systems, your experience with healthcare is relegated to a 10 or 15 minute visit, if that, with your primary care provider.
Well, Sameer, I knew this was going to be a great episode. I'm so glad that you were able to come on and shared even more than I thought you would, from a place of mindset and really your experiences to help inspire a lot of people. But before we let you go, we were hoping that you have about 10 more minutes to play what is now really a world famous wrap up of each episode. And if you've listened to an episode before, Seema and I have a couple of questions that we go back and forth on. And at the end, we do have a lot of Canadian listeners. I think last check, we were being listened to like over 115 countries. So we have a lot of Canadian listeners, and I want you to be able to tell people where they can find you and Nia. And I know that you have benefited from mentors and certainly recognize the gift in being able to give back and being a mentor yourself. As you know, we live in an instant gratification world. We want it now, we want it yesterday. But we know that a lot of these things come from wisdom and experience and things like that. So what's one thing that you can share with our listeners today that you know beyond a doubt that if we started doing that today, we weren't doing it yesterday, we started doing it today, in short order, we would see some benefits?
Find a friend in another generation than you. I think that just bottom line, develop a friendship outside of your own generation. The number of people I see, I think most of the population is just will hang out with friends in their own circles, around their own age group, stage of life. And that's natural. And you got to have that. But both from a younger perspective and an older perspective, all along the way, I think it's such an important thing to get out of your box and to kind of have a diverse set of friendships that span different age groups. I think it's one of the things that's accessible to any of us.
That's a really good one. I think it's sophisticated. I think it's great, but I couldn't really appreciate what you're saying because now I'm wondering if you go tell everyone that you're on this podcast with your old friend. Am I the old friend? Am I the older generation friend?
My elder.
Your elder friend. That's good. That's one we haven't heard before.
Oh, yeah. Sameer, I don't think you know this about me, but I worked in nursing homes. I would travel to different nursing homes as a dentist. And that while the dental component didn't fill my cup as much, what did fill my cup and the stories that I still carry with me are the ones of my patients who, it was just incredible to hear their life stories, to hear their perspectives, and it was a really, really invaluable gift. So ask it forward for our seasoned listeners, they know, but the guest previous to you has left a question for you, not knowing who you are, what we're going to talk about, even when we're going to record. They just left a question and you get to answer it and then leave a question for the next guest. This question is from Dr. Jay Butt, who is the dancing doctor. His question to you is, what is the word you want to embody in this coming year?
Yeah, so I'd actually say the word for this year is resolve. Right now is a very, very tumultuous period. Just from like a personal, professional perspective, there's a lot of stuff in flux. And honestly, I knew this coming into this year. And in these times of chaos and turbulence, you can either kind of wither away or collapse from the chaos, or you can deepen your resolve. And so to me, the challenge at hand for this year, the thing that I think about in times like this is deepening resolve, understanding yourself just a little bit better every day, and trying to live an authentic life as much as possible. So resolve is the word of this year. And that was a great question.
Yeah, it was a great question. So what's the question you'd like to leave for the next guest?
The question I want to leave is, is there a mantra or a quote that you live by?
So good.
And mine is the man in the arena. If you guys know that quote from Teddy Roosevelt, I have it posted up on my bedside. So I look at it every morning.
Tell me what that is.
Okay, so it's little bit long, but it's worth hearing. So I'll tell you because I memorized this in my early 20s. Teddy Roosevelt, the former president of the U.S., said this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or how the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who falls short again and again, for there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who does the deeds, who knows the enthusiasms, the great devotions, and who in the end, at best, knows the triumph of high achievement. And at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." So that's a quote. That's a quote that's on my bedside, and I try to live by. So
love it.
So good. I love the delivery. Man, that was an empowered, impassioned. embodiment of those wise words.
The best way we can say thanks is to say thank you. But the second best way to respect the time that you've given to us is to give you an opportunity to share with us a cause that's near and dear to your heart. And on behalf of you being here and spending some time with us, Seema and I will make a contribution to that organization as a way of saying thank you.
That'd be very special. Although it's my privilege to be here, so I appreciate that. I would say the Alzheimer's Society, and make it the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, so you can
Absolutely.
throw some of your nice U.S. greenback our way, and we can make a political statement with that too. But yeah, no, I to me it's probably obvious after this conversation, but just given my connection to elders in that specific population, and I have friends, knowing that I have multi-generational friends who have now been diagnosed with dementia, and it's one of those diseases that I think really shatters a lot of people and makes families tears some families apart, to be honest, and it's a sad one to observe in friendships as well. So I'd love to see a world where we're dementia free one day.
I think we can all agree to that. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to make that donation to the Canada brothers and sisters.
Right. All right.
Well, what's one thing now I want our listeners to be able to know where to connect with you, so that if they want to learn more about your company or connect with you in any way for mentorship or anything else, they know where to go.
Yeah, well, best place is niahealth.co. So it's niahealth.co, not .com, but .co. And Sameer at niahealth.co.